Welcome back to The Wandering Naturalist. My name is Brandon, he, him.
And this is Angela, she, her.
Last time we talked to Dr. Michelle Carstensen, Wildlife Health Program Supervisor for the Minnesota DNR, about diseases in wildlife and how they're monitoring them in some projects that she's been excited for. Today, we are talking to Dr. Isaiah E. Tolo, Fish Health Supervisor at Minnesota DNR, to talk a little bit about diseases in our aquatic systems. So, welcome, Dr. Tolo. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, my name is Isaiah Tolo, Dr. Isaiah Tolo, but just call me Isaiah, please. And
we will.
Yeah, and I'm the fish health supervisor for the Department of Natural Resources. So sort of Michelle's counterpart on the fish side, but the job is very different.
What? No, things are different in the water?
Oh, yes, very different. Yeah.
I'm excited to hear.
Fish are, if wildlife are a little bit of an underdog, we're the underdogs of the underdogs. While lakes are at the very bottom of watersheds,
which
is
is
the lowest point. That's where everything goes.
So weird to me in Minnesota because we're the land of 10,000 lakes. Like Michelle was just talking about, everyone loves moose. Like, doesn't everyone have a bunch of fish stuff all over their houses? Why aren't people...
It's one of those weird things about fish that, every single one of them is shaped like a torpedo. And so, we kind of like, people are surprised when they hear, hey, wait, how many species of them are there? And it's like, well, over 100 in Minnesota. So yeah, there's a lot of different ones. And some of them are genetically as different from each other as a, mouse is from a moose, They're not anything like each other. They have incredible adaptations that allow them to live in the water that make them kind of alien to us. So, yeah. So go ahead.
I was going to say, I think too, because we don't see them a lot, like, I can easily picture a mammal getting sick because I've seen my dog getting sick.
Yeah, what are they even doing down there, right?
Right? Like, I can picture
a
mammal or something else with a tumor. My daughter's pet fish got a tumor. I was like, wait, fish get tumors? I had never thought about that before. So I think because they're out of sight, they're kind of out of mind. We don't think about them being like, who's ever seen a sick fish? Would I even know if it was sick if I saw it? I think it just kind of keeps us from thinking about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's some really wonderful books out there. What a Fish Knows, or Why Fish Don't Exist, or another one.
Is this like the birds aren't real thing?
Oh, they're incredible. There's like maybe a little bit of like a surge in literature about animal intelligence that, fish have been caught up into that. And so we know a lot more about them from those types of work that people have put out so that we can, get a better sense of what they're like. But yeah.
So curious, we asked this of all of our guests, kind of, you're explaining what you're doing now, but how did you get there? Were you always into aquatics and fisheries, or was your path a little bit different of how you got into it?
Oh yeah, not at all. I definitely at one point thought that I was going to be like a folk kind of country singer or something like that, maybe when I was in high school. But then at some point I moved into something that seemed a little bit more concrete. I learned in college that I really enjoyed biology and chemistry classes. I got to help out with some of the research work that a professor was doing, looking at trypanosome infections as a rat model, basically. And then I worked with a professor who was doing marine biology trips at the Gulf Coast Research Lab in Mississippi, where I was going to college. And that really kind of woke me up to that interest in fisheries. I really loved working in the estuary and trying all the different gear types for trapping fish and seeing these diverse communities that you'd never really get to see firsthand. But I always had an interest in diseases. I maybe have like slightly morbid interests. Like horror is definitely my favorite genre.
I mean, I was sharing about how I got excited about dead deer. So
yeah, it made me look at you a little different.
Yeah. It's okay. We're used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really maybe more interested in public health, like human health. I didn't really know that there were career paths in fish and wildlife. It was kind of surprising to me that was something that you could go to graduate school for. So originally I was working more with population genetics of bacteria that infect humans, and I was working with that during my master's degree. But
that was here at the University of Minnesota.
That was in Mississippi as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, at a teaching hospital there, University of Mississippi Medical Center. But then in moving into doctoral work, I was really interested in transferring some of those diagnostic techniques that I was learning for human health over to the fishery side, because I knew that was something that I was much more interested in.
bringing them together.
I was building aquaponics, systems in my backyard, and just, I really wanted to do something more with that. So I found sort of like a kind of a dream partnership coming up here, and working with the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center actually had some really great aquatic research, including research into fish pathogens. And it was, I think, maybe the first or second week that I was here that we had our first detection of a virus called koi herpes virus, which was kind of a mystery at the time. No one had really seen it before, and it was killing hundreds of carp in lakes, and people were getting a little bit alarmed. So we ran a couple of qPCRs and found that it was koi herpes virus.
Yeah, and I was reading like you were the first one to find that.
Yeah, it was really kind of a lucky break to be able to have a disease that was actively moving through a population. You need data if you want to publish papers and you want to complete a doctoral thesis. So I was lucky to have a really good model organism to work on to try and see what the disease ecology of a fish virus was. Because again, it's hard to study fish in general. It's really hard to study fish diseases. So that was a lucky find, but it was exactly what I kind of needed in order to continue to move and in this field and develop my skills there. So yeah. And that's kind of how I got to where I am, I suppose. I mean, after that, doing that work, I was working really closely with the DNR Fish Health Lab, which is what we call it now. Back then, it was called the Pathology Lab. Mm-hmm. Wanted to get a little bit more focused. And when the job came up to run that lab, I was very close to being done with my doctoral work, so I jumped right into it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I love when stuff works that way. And I guess there's a question too that I again, I'm visualizing like a lot of lab stuff. You mentioned like you were good at chemistry. I was not. So,
well, they say I was good at it. I say I liked it.
It's true. I didn't like it either. All right. I didn't like it either. Yeah. I wasn't good at it. I struggled. So are you for doing this type of work? And this wasn't something Michelle painted more of a picture of like in the field perhaps, but I imagine the other side of any of these diseases is there's a lab component to it as well. So is it kind of like a 50-50? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I like to be everywhere all at once, and I definitely love the field work. I mean, the work of field work for fisheries is complex. There's lots of gear types. There's lots of capturing and handling animals. There's all sorts of different sort of variations in the type of lakes that you're working in. So it can be, quite variable. During my doctoral work, I spent a lot of time driving an electrofishing boat and capturing carp, which are big and difficult to deal with fish. But then there is also the laboratory side. So I've kind of been lucky to be in a small enough field where you have to do everything yourself. And so my lab my lab staff spend quite a bit of time in the lab, but we also are fortunate to be able to get our hands and feet wet pretty often, working in our state fish hatcheries or participating in surveillance work in the field. So, yeah.
I really want to get out electrofishing. This is something
I'll take you.
Yeah, I know, Brand.
Yeah.
Now we have Jenna from the DNR, and she's
good.
big into fisheries. So our water quality team is starting to build up our equipment and do that. So for people that aren't familiar with this, and maybe they're thinking in their head like fishing, netting, like those are the two things that come to mind when it comes to like collecting samples. Michelle shared about like the net guns or collecting samples from hunters. So how do you get samples when it comes to aquatics and fish?
Yeah, so a number of different ways. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're doing work like looking for contaminants in fish tissues, then it doesn't really matter what gear type you use to collect them, as long as you're getting the sizes that are important for, like human consumption. But if you're looking for, say, a virus in fish that you're interested in being able to grow up in a lab, then you need to have live individuals that you can, euthanize humanely in the field and then get those fresh tissues directly onto like a cell line or something like that. And so it can range from being, something like a gill netting survey where essentially you're pulling up, fish from that are getting caught, by their heads in a net, or maybe something more targeted, like you're driving out with an electrofishing boat where you're actually using an electric charge to capture those fish live. It doesn't hurt them, it just stuns them for a moment, and you're able to net them and be able to handle them safely. So.
And then what kind of samples are you taking from them?
So fish have really different physiologies than humans do. So a lot of times, we'll be collecting samples from their kidney, which in a fish is not just an organ that like filters your blood and makes urine and stuff like that. It does that, but it does a whole bunch of other things too, and including, producing the blood cells that fish have. They're very similar to ours for, like red blood cells, which are nucleated in fish. It's very interesting. They look like a fried egg, and white blood cells. So that tissue is, very important in fish, and has, is also often the target for pathogens. So that's one of the tissues that we sample quite a bit. But there's other tissues. It just depends on which disease you're looking for. One disease that we're constantly screening for is the causative agent of whirling disease. And in that case, you actually have to use the fish's skull, and you have to be able to digest that skull in order to find the parasites that could potentially be there. So there's a whole range of different samples.
But most of them sound pretty lethal, that you would actually...
Oh, yes. Yeah, that is one of the challenges is that when we do our diagnostic work, a lot of times we're having to sample pretty large sample sizes of fish, and most of the time it's lethal. We have experimented with doing some different methods of non-lethal inspections, but they can be really challenging. Like doing a gill biopsy in a fish, it can be quite challenging, but we do that with some of our steelhead inspections, since those are pretty rare and difficult to come by.
So it all depends on the commonality of that species. You'd have respect to that. If it's a sensitive species or population, then you probably you're more limited then to what you can surveillance and monitor.
Oh yes, yeah.
So definitely. It sounds more challenging.
It can be very difficult, and it also we're one of the things that's pretty different about fisheries compared to kind of the wildlife world is that we're actually dealing with not just working with wildlife, but also working with commercial wildlife. So in our case, but there's actually a number of fish farms throughout the state that actually produce game fish, and people are allowed to stock those. So we have a lot more kind of like movement of those animals around the state. And so we actually have to screen those farm populations, screen fish populations that are moving into the state for different diseases. So it's a lot more of that goes on. So not only can it be difficult at times, but the volume is actually really high. So in terms of our kind of screening programs, we are going through thousands and thousands of samples every year. So
that's a good way to put it into perspective, trying to think that quantity-wise, there's probably more fish than there are terrestrial wildlife. I don't know, I'm trying to picture that in my head. How would that level up?
Yes, certainly there's
gotta be
there's
more.
lots of fish. Yes.
Yeah. That's crazy to kind of, I didn't really think of that now. Or I do think of salmon, and tilapia, and things like that for farming. But you're saying even our game species are essentially farmed for stocking.
Yes.
And people's personal.
Yeah, so it's something that I actually find that is usually surprising when I talk about what I do.
I would have not thought of that.
Yeah, that there are hundreds of fish farms throughout the country that produce game fish like black crappies and bluegills and bass, and people want to be able to stock their own little pond, and that happens in Minnesota. It always confuses me a little bit because I'm like, why would you want to stock a pond with a bluegill if you can just go fish just about anywhere? But there's a drive to do it. There's also it's also pretty common when it comes to cold water fishes like rainbow trout, so people want to be able to stock those as well. And there's quite a bit of movement in and out of the state that happens each year. And we one of our tasks as a fish health lab is we keep track of those transports in the state, and we monitor whether or not these individuals that are wanting to move fish are actually doing their disease testing properly. So we actually have to look through all that paperwork, make sure that they've been tested for the right things, that everything lines up, that they're moving the species they're saying they're going to move. And then we work with our area staff to make sure that, when fish are stocked, it's done in a way where they're not going to be potentially moving diseases that are on our radar.
Sure.
Yeah.
Brandon, I'm going to give you some time.
Yeah, I'm.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, there he
is.
Hello. No, you're good. You're good. I know nothing about this, so I'm really fascinated, and I'm also really curious. I just don't think about diseases in fish, really. Are there any diseases you're monitoring for that you're really worried about it's going to become a bigger problem in the future, or it's going to have a huge impact on our fish populations or other populations?
Yeah, so what I would say is that with fish, I think that we're really kind of far behind in a lot of ways. Most of the pathogens that we screen for are ones that we're trying not to introduce through, stocking programs. So a lot of those tend to be salmonid pathogens or pathogens that are important in kind of like aquaculture settings. When it comes to wildlife disease, there's a lot that we don't know when it comes to fish. But there are a number of important pathogens, one of which is not even in Minnesota. Viral hemorrhagic septicemia, VHSV, is
another
one
acronym. Acronym.
That's probably the one that people are most familiar with, but we're actually the only Great Lakes state that doesn't have
it.
VHSV.
And why do you think that is?
It has.
Or maybe do we have it? We don't know.
It's possible that one of the things that might be a barrier to entry is that we don't allow importation of bait fish into Minnesota, which is pretty interesting. There's some states that don't use bait fish at all. There are states that allow for importation of bait fish, and then there are some that don't allow for importation of bait fish, and we're kind of rare in that regard. So we don't allow any other essentially live bait to be moved into the state to be used to go fishing with. And that's pretty important because there's a number of bait fish species that are susceptible to that virus, and they're moved in huge numbers. Yeah. So that might be one reason. Another one is that our shoreline on Lake Superior is quite deep and cold. It's a little bit more cold.
It's kind of the last in the chain. We were just talking about this within all the aquatic invasives. Like by the time it gets to Minnesota, hopefully people have figured something out.
So it might be the same reason why we don't have alewife, on that coast, may be similar to why we don't have VHS there. Not totally clear why we don't. We haven't. In the past we weren't actually even really screening our Lake Superior shoreline very closely, but in the last 4 years we've been doing more work to kind of survey that region and see what the prevalence is. And it turns out that we can't find it so far. So we've been screening hundreds of fish from there and still haven't found it.
Is this disease deadly? Like, is it something that is a slow over time, or it would be pretty lethal?
It is a rhabdovirus. So think like rabies.
Oh, wow.
So it's rhabdoviruses or small RNA viruses. They can jump from species to species really quickly. So there doesn't seem to be a lot in terms of species barriers. Some viruses in fish are very species specific.
Okay.
Like herpes viruses, they've basically been the type that they are since like a sturgeon became a sturgeon. It's they've always had it. And then there are other viruses that can kind of jump from species to species quickly, and VHS is one of those. But in Minnesota, we dedicate quite a bit of biosecurity and disease testing to that virus, even though it's not here, because of the fact that it can be so detrimental to fish operations and can cause mass mortality events, and does. And just about every year we see large mass mortality events throughout the Great Lakes region. So one of the big tasks that we do every year is that we screen around the state to certify our state as disease free. So we have a plan for how we do that screening to make sure that if the virus were to show up, we'd catch it.
Yeah. And be able to react quickly to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
All about having that plan ahead.
I'm also curious, we were talking in our last episode about how some diseases can go from animals to humans, or humans can introduce them to animals. Are there any diseases people can get from fish?
Yeah,
Are there any diseases we're introducing to fish?
We love eating our fish. That's a great question.
Well, I just so I can make sure that the whole conversation doesn't shut down when I say not really, because this is one of the things with fish is that there isn't really a ton of zoonotic pathogens that we have to worry about, not in the same way that we do with wildlife. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think that fish diseases don't really interest people that often, because it's
doesn't
like, so there's not really like some kind of crazy
directly
virus that I can get from a fish. Okay, well, okay, I'm out. But there are a few. There's some cestode, think like tapeworms and other like trematode parasites that can infect people. And so it is important that you cook fish before you eat it. Yeah,
I vaguely remember reading this because I love catching crappie. And there was something about, and maybe this was just this last summer, about like, if you see this when you're cleaning it, then you probably shouldn't eat it.
Oh.
I'm blanking on what it was now.
I'm wondering were you fishing in Wisconsin by any chance?
Yes, it was in Wisconsin.
So you're probably thinking like black crappie sarcoma virus.
Okay.
But there's no evidence that can be transmitted to people, but we just don't really know much about it. And so that's one of the things, this is, again, what we're kind of behind the eight ball sometimes when it comes to fish diseases. We tend to say that it's probably not a good idea to eat those fish if they seem to be infected with something.
Why even, risk it? Or
So why risk it? It's the same thing with other diseases like myofibrogranuloma or sandy flesh disease in walleye. Sometimes you'll be, filleting a fish and you'll see kind of this, kind of cruddy looking fillet. Heterosporus sutherlandii is another one of those that kind of affects the way that the fish fillet looks, but there's no evidence that those diseases can be transmitted to humans.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
You said zoonotic?
Yeah, zoonotic.
What is that word?
So zoonotic is just referring to pathogens that can be transmitted from animals to humans.
Yay, that was our loon call. I thought maybe
I heard the loon. Okay.
you get a coffee mug as a prize.
Oh my goodness, I'm so honored. Thank you.
Because you mentioned this, like people tune out, like, oh, well, if I can't get anything from eating fish, why should I worry? So why should people be concerned about what's happening in our fish populations when it comes to diseases?
Well, I would say for a couple of different reasons. One of them is that, when we think about biodiversity declines across the planet, amphibians and fish are the most heavily hit. So, thinking about, North America, I think since like the early 1900s, there have been 50 extinctions of freshwater fish species. And, by 2050, I think we're projected to be at more like over 80 species extinct. And so, they're a sensitive group of animals. They live, in these lakes where it's kind of the where all of our junk ends up.
Yeah, everything gets into there eventually.
Mm-hmm. And also those are biomes that are changing with climate change. So, we talk sometimes about this process of eutrophication. I think that's probably come up in your podcast before, but basically talking about sort of this rapid or faster than what we would expect aging of these water bodies because of nutrient inputs. And, we have kind of a few different factors that are coming together that are really challenging fish populations. And disease, which a lot of these are brought in, from invasive species or through, stocking operations. So these are fish that are being, we're essentially having kind of a spillover event where diseases from aquaculture or from invasive species are ending up in our native fish populations. They're having to deal with that on top of these other really big climatic changes that are happening to them. And that's a big problem. And so we need to be aware of that. Like, there's a few different pathogens out there that we kind of consider like poster children for climate change impacts. One of them is Tetracapsuloides bryosalmonae, or proliferative kidney disease, that has just recently been detected as of last year in a few Great Lakes states, and we'd never seen it before. So, my lab is doing some work to screen for that pathogen and see if it's present in our salmonid populations as well. And as the climate changes, we expect that there will be more disease impacts related to that pathogen, as well as with some of our, opportunistic infections like flavobacteria. We see mortality events associated with those pathogens that are just kind of present in the water. But it takes, that higher nutrient load and warmer water temperatures and stressed fish populations in order to see these pretty big impacts. So we should be concerned.
We should be concerned, people. And I know we didn't get a whole time to touch on this, but the fish kill surveillance program I know is another big thing too. And maybe this is a part where citizen science can help, or other people, because I know we get a lot of questions about fish kills.
Yeah, fish kills it's one of those things where, I whenever I get asked, is it weird that thousands of fish are dying in a lake, near me? And it's like, yeah, that's actually not usually normal. There are some cases where there might be like a winter kill event where, under the ice we're like losing dissolved oxygen and we have a mass mortality event of fish. But, fish have these, this interesting relationship with oxygen where, we have like 20 something percent saturation in this room, and that's good for us. They're dealing with like less than 1% in water, and their gills are so amazingly adapted so they can do these, kind of incredible feats of speed and power that, are amazing. But it's, thanks to this really incredible but delicate organ that they have. And so anything that breathes, oxygen from the water is susceptible to changes in that. We have, changes in air temperature, or we have ice cover, and then we have issues with too many nutrients in the water that are also competing for that oxygen. And so we see a lot of mortality events throughout the state that are related to water quality issues. Oxygen is just one of those. And then we have other ways that we, interfere with that ability for them to respirate. Like this last year, we had an issue with a chlorine or chloramine spill in Duluth that killed a whole street breach of brook trout. So, all that to say, these things are happening, and they happen across the entire landscape because they're really related to like kind of bigger climactic issues. And the only way that we find out about them are from
People reporting it.
Yeah, people reporting them. So you can, Google a Minnesota duty officer program and then call that number if you see a fish kill. And my lab is working to try and develop this database of fish kills into something that we can understand how fish kills have changed over time, and also what their seasonality may be, and to start to understand what some of those risk factors may be. So that's actually a research project that we have ongoing with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the University of Minnesota to build some risk maps to understand, statewide, what are we dealing with when it comes to fish kills, and then specifically in trout streams to understand sort of what types of risk factors are associated with these large-scale mortality events. So yeah, we really do need people to keep reporting them, and we always appreciate it when people do, even if it's just 1 or 2 fish that are dying. Let us know. We'd love to hear. So
yeah, anything that they can do, take pictures or what information, location.
The location information is really important, but anything that you observe in the field can be useful. There's going to be like a case narrative portion of any duty officer report that when you relay that information to the duty officer, they're going to type all that down, and then we have a method. We actually work with EPA and Duluth to digitize that data and put it into our database. So anything that you report, we're going to be able to use that as clues to understand what might be going on.
Yep, we always love a good call to citizen science. And just like Michelle shared too, are there any prevention tips to share with our listeners on what they can do to help maintain healthy fish populations? Maybe it's something with our bait fish, like you mentioned, what we're putting into our waterways. What are ways that people can help? Yeah,
I would say number one thing is follow the rules. It's illegal to import or to move live fish around in the state, unless you're buying them from like a pet store and putting them into an aquarium or something like that. It's different outside of our purview. But, a lot of times people want to start like, they want to stock a pond, or they want to start an aquaponics system, or, have something like that. And anytime that people are moving fish, we really need to know that that's happening. Don't do, the kind of bucket biology thing where you're like, oh,
I'm gonna catch it here, put it in a bucket.
Where did those
bring it here?
I would really love to have some yellow bass, in one of our lakes. Let's just move some in there. But you don't know what hitchhikers you may be moving along with those fish. So make sure that you are obeying the rules. Same thing goes for using bait. Don't bring bait, from out of state, or, use illegal bait. Make sure that you're following the rules when it comes to the type of bait that you're using, and don't release it into the lake. That's another important one. So I would say, following the rules, they're there for a reason. We have a pretty, big task in trying to manage fish health in the state. And so everyone doing their part makes a difference.
Brandon, anything else?
I think that covers it. That really, I learned so much from this that I had never considered. So thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, I feel like most of us can relate to like fishing or time at the lake. So I'm hoping this brings some awareness to it. And if there's any words of wisdom for anyone else that's maybe thinking, I really like fisheries and I want to get involved, what words of advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, like Michelle said, first of all, yes, you are a rare butterfly, and we definitely love you and want you to join our ranks. But I would say, one plug is that if you are interested in fish health, one thing to keep your eye out for is any sort of courses that are related to environmental and aquatic toxicology. That's a huge emerging issue. We know that, even eating fish around the state can be something where we pick up contaminants from eating those fish tissues, but we really don't know much of anything of what happens to those fish communities that are bioaccumulating these contaminants. A lot of them are, endocrine disruptors or estrogenic chemicals, and we don't know how that's affecting our fish population. So it's an emerging issue. It's a blind spot. And if you're interested in that, man, we could use you. But if you're interested in this field, there's not a whole lot of jobs out there for it, but
yet, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
I think it's growing. Yeah. That's my hope, is that it's growing.
Yeah. And I think people can drive that too. Like we all have the power to drive that by, how we vote and writing letters to our legislation, that these are important issues to us, that we care about our fish and them staying healthy.
Absolutely.
Well, that's so great, Isaiah. It was such a pleasure to meet you. You came so highly recommended, and we will take you up on the electrofishing. Brandon and I keep saying that.
I would love to.
Okay.
We've got the portable recorders now, so it'll be perfect.
Yes.
We can do some fun fishy stuff. We can figure something out. Yeah.
That would be great. So thank you for taking time to join us in the studio today, and looking forward to hopefully our paths crossing again.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
So don't miss our last interview around wildlife disease, because up next is Dr. Michelle Powers to share her passion about science communication all the way from Australia.